Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey everybody, this is the Digital Asset Investor, and today I decided I was going to do something a little different, and that is I put together a little spreadsheet, and I'm going to show you, with the use of a little bit of history, I'm going to show you how I view my XRP investment, and it will also illustrate just how monumental the time that we are in is, and one thing that has blown me away during the course of the last 2 years is to watch people who were, people that were significant, that talked about XRP all the time, did their own research. They know all of this in and out. One thing that has blown my mind is that here, after a 2-year bear market, just because prices have not gone in the direction that some people want them to, that people still do not understand what they own. Okay, and today I'm going to attempt to show you what I think I own and what I think you own if you're a holder, and the reason that you don't ever see me lose any kind of faith in what I own. I know exactly what I own. Now, it took me a journey of really 7 years to really understand what I own. Well, this video is my attempt to explain to you what you own. Because if you understand what you own, when you look at CoinMarketCap and you see all these, little green and percentages and 21 cents and all this, doesn't mean anything. It's a distraction. Glenn Hutchins told you it's a distraction. And remember, I think yesterday I showed you that Brad Garlinghouse was an advisor at Silver Lake, which Glenn Hutchins founded. And then all of this just kind of happens, and Glenn Hutchins is one of the advisors at Digital Currency Group, which is more or less owned by the most powerful people in the world. None of this is a coincidence, and you need to know what you own, and I'm going to show you. Now, first, I want to get a couple of housekeeping things out of the way. I tweeted this yesterday. I had a while back, and I never announced it, but a while back, I had started to put some of my when I do a video on YouTube, I then turn around and take it and upload it to a podcast. And I use a company called Podbean to do that, and then I upload it to there, and then it gets it. That's kind of the my host, I guess. And then it uploads to Apple iTunes. Right now, I'm waiting on Apple. But I think I'm on Google Play right now. I'm on Spotify, and I just started uploading again yesterday. So what you'll see is that what I did is, this is in response to Ripple. Ripple sued. We talked about this. Ripple has sued YouTube to get them to take some of the scam accounts down. Then David Schwartz's YouTube channel was taken down. So just in anticipation, if YouTube decides, okay, well, we're just going to delete all channels that say Ripple or XRP, then I'm going to do a couple of things. The first thing I did, which I told you yesterday, is I created DAI in Exile. That's a channel. It's my alternate YouTube channel. You can go and subscribe to that. What I will do if they did take me down is I'm going to have a podcast. Now, for those of you that don't know, with a podcast, you can download I'm going to take every show I do, I'm going to put it on the podcast, and you'll be able to download those, so you won't need to be live on the internet like if you were in your car or something to listen. So go and do that, and I put this here. This is what the thing looks like on Podbean. Podbean, you can go and listen to it. But you can also probably by the end of this week, Apple will have me on theirs. I'm already on Google Play. I'm already on Spotify. And so every show that I do, now it's not going to be visual. It's just going to be the audio of my show. And then I'm probably also going to start uploading either to Cinnamon or something like that. if that happens. It's too much work if it doesn't happen. So I'm not going to go there if it doesn't happen. But there it is. I have a podcast. And something that's funny to me is in the world of social media that I never have understood. Somehow if you have a podcast, then you are viewed as more legitimate than if you have a YouTube channel, when really it's just a matter of where you're uploading it to and the fact that most of the podcasts are just audio. But there's this perception, it's almost like a snobbery. There's this perception that if you have a podcast, that somehow is closer to being legitimate media than a YouTube channel, when the fact is you should be considered legitimate if you have a large following, because large followings only happen if you have something good and smart to say. Otherwise, people are not going to follow you. And so that's kind of a stupid thing. But anyway, that's another conversation. Now, David Schwartz, they're doing the Ripple drops. Apparently, they're doing them remotely. This is from Reinhardt Kate that always does the Ripple drops, and he did a Ripple drop remote edition, and it's with David Schwartz. You can see Reinhardt. Look, Reinhardt Kate has got a full-grown mustache now, it looks like. So anyway, I figured I'd use this David Schwartz picture as my thumbnail. Okay, now I'm going to get into what you own and what I own, okay? Now I'm going to get into it, and this is going to start from Ripple. They put out their Q1 2020 XRP markets report. And I've told you before, these market reports bore me to tears. I don't care about that. I'm interested in the big picture. I do care about some of the themes that come out of it, though, okay? But the numbers and all of that bores me because I understand the big picture and I understand what I own. But this part, I thought this was significant that they wanted to write this up. Market snapshot. Crypto as a safe haven asset class. Since the advent of Bitcoin, digital assets are often referred to as safe haven assets, or assets that market participants can turn to during turmoil in financial markets due to their presumed lack of correlation to traditional markets. Born out of the 2008 financial crisis, digital assets put the safe haven label to the test. That was all about to change on March 12, 2020, or what some describe as Black Thursday. In the days preceding Black Thursday, and they're talking about digital assets, but I want to take you to the bottom here. For some reason, Ripple thought this was significant to bring out. Given the recession and the continued uncertainty about the extent of the long-term economic impact this global crisis will impose, we expect continued market volatility and a sustained test for crypto as to whether it performs as a safe haven asset class. Well, I continue to maintain, look, just because the world doesn't even understand what digital assets are yet does not mean that safe haven status is not ultimately a part of what will drive digital assets. If you understand what I'm going to talk about in today's video, and once you've completely comprehended it, there's no question in the world that you'll see it as a safe haven asset class. But I think that's just one tiny part of the recipe. Maybe not tiny, but it's a part of the recipe. So now, as we go along here, in order for me to make you understand what you own and let you understand where I'm coming from, I want to show you a little bit of history. I've talked about this on this channel before. I don't think I've ever played it, and I'm not going to play a bunch of it right now, but I am going to play you just the start of it. But what this is, this guy's name's G. Edward Griffin. He wrote a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And what that book is about, and I've talked about it on this channel before, is that book was about it was about the creation of the Federal Reserve and the secrecy in which it was done. Now, and the reason I'm showing you this is because I believe that Ripple and XRP are a part of a plan at post 2008 financial crisis. I believe it has always been a part of a plan. This is the big picture, folks. It has always been a part of the plan to have a financial reset, but instead of it, I think it's the equivalent of when they created the Federal Reserve. Remember, when they created the Federal Reserve, it was the creation of the ultimate monopoly, a monopoly on money. In other words, once that Federal Reserve was created, it was created, as he'll tell you here, it was created by powerful people who wanted to have a monopoly on money, who'd be able to control the money. Okay, you name it, Rothschilds, all of that. Okay, but the point is that I believe that digital assets, specifically XRP and probably XLM, were created. I believe it was all created for the purpose of fixing what they, after 2008, they knew was a flawed system. Okay, and remember, all the Federal Reserve was is all of a sudden everybody went to a Federal Reserve. If you had the word bank on your building, you can be handed money, and then you can turn around and make money on the money that's being handed to you. It's just a printing scheme is all it was. The ultimate Ponzi scheme that I believe the smart people, they knew in 2008, this is the end. We've got to initiate the plan. Okay. Well, he's going to tell you here briefly. Let me go back. It starts at the 10-minute mark. He's going to tell you just a little bit. I'm not going to make you listen to the whole thing, but it is fascinating. And if you have time, you should go listen to this whole thing. Listen to what he says. This is how the Federal Reserve was hatched. They tried to make you think at the time that it was all hatched in Congress. No, things were done behind the scenes in order to make it happen.
In a cottage with that much running plumbing. But the important point was that this is where the Federal Reserve System was conceived, is in that clubhouse. So let's tell that story. It all began in November of 1910 when Senator Nelson Aldrich sent his private railroad car to the New Jersey Railroad Station, where there it was in readiness for the arrival of himself and 6 other men who were instructed to come under conditions of great secrecy. For example, they were told to come one at a time, not to be seen together, not to dine together on the night of their departure. If they had arrived at the same time, they were instructed to pretend as though they didn't even know each other. They were to avoid newspaper reporters, because these were well-known men, and had they been spotted by reporters, which often frequented the railroad station, especially had they been seen together, many questions would have been asked. One of the men carried a shotgun in a big black case, so that if he had been asked where he was going, he was prepared to say that he was going on a duck hunting trip. And the interesting thing about that little piece of the history is that this man, we find out later from his biographer, never fired a gun in his life. He even had to borrow that shotgun in order to participate in this deception. Even after they got on board the railroad car, this pattern continued. They were told to use first names only, not to use last names. And 2 of the men adopted code names completely. The reason for that is that they were afraid that the servants on board the train would recognize who they were if they used their last names. And they knew that if word leaked out in that fashion and eventually found its way into the press, the whole purpose of the meeting would have been completely destroyed. So absolute secrecy was essential. Well, the train traveled for 2 nights and a day on a 1,000-mile journey to the south, and when they awoke on the second morning, the car was on the siding, the railroad siding at Brunswick, Georgia. And from there they took the ferry boat across the inland strait to Jekyll Island and to the clubhouse. And for the next 9 days, these men sat around a table and hammered out all the important details of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. And incidentally, if you visit that clubhouse today, you can walk down to the end of the one corridor there, and on a door is a brass plaque. And it says, "In this room, the Federal Reserve System was created." When they were done, they got back on board the train, back to New York, and disappeared. And for quite a few years after that, these men denied that any such meeting ever took place. It wasn't until after the Federal Reserve was firmly established that only then did they begin to talk openly about it. They wrote books on it. One of them wrote a magazine article, and they gave interviews to newspaper reporters. And so now, many years later, it's possible for us to go to the public record and find in print detailed descriptions of what happened at that meeting. Well, who were these men? The first one I've already mentioned, the one with the railroad car, Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was the Republican whip in the Senate. He was also chairman of the National Monetary Commission, which was that special committee of Congress which was created for the purpose of proposing legislation which was to reform banking. That was the idea. Banking needed reform. And the American people were greatly concerned in those days over things that were going on in the banking industry. People were losing their money in the banks because they weren't keeping their promises to hold their deposits in reserve. There were runs on the bank, and the banks couldn't pay the people back. But most of all, they were concerned over the concentration of financial power that was in the hands of a small group of very powerful and large banks in New York on Wall Street. This is what they called the money trust. That was the name, and it was a very popular expression in the newspapers. And quite a few politicians were elected to office on their campaign promise to break the grip of the money trust. President Wilson was one of those politicians, by the way. So, that was the purpose of the National Monetary Commission, which was to propose legislation, which eventually became the Federal Reserve Act, to break the grip of the money trust over the financial markets of America. Aldrich was a business associate of J.P. Morgan. He was the father-in-law to John D. Rockefeller, Jr., which means, of course, that eventually he became the grandfather of Nelson Rockefeller, our former vice president. You remember his full name was Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, so he derived his middle name from his famous grandfather. The second person at the meeting was Abraham Piatt Andrew, who was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. He later became a congressman, but he was very prominent in banking circles. Frank Vanderlip was there. He was the president of the National City Bank of New York, which was the largest and the most powerful of all the banks in the country, representing the financial interests of William Rockefeller and the international investment firm of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Henry Davison was there. He was the senior partner of the J.P. Morgan Company. Charles Norton was present. He was the president of the First National Bank of New York, which was another one of the giants. Also, there was Benjamin Strong, who was the head of J.P. Morgan's Bankers Trust Company. And incidentally, 3 years later, when the Federal Reserve System was finally created, he became the first head of the system. And finally, there was Paul Warburg, who was probably the most important of all the men there because of his knowledge of banking as it was practiced in Europe. Paul Warburg was born in Germany. He eventually became a naturalized American citizen. He was a partner in Kuhn, Loeb and Company. He was a representative of the Rothschild banking dynasty in England and France. And through all the years of his banking in America, he remained in very close contact with his brother, Max Warburg, who was the head of the Warburg Banking Consortium in Germany and the Netherlands. Paul Warburg was one of the wealthiest men in the world. And those of you who are Little Orphan Annie fans, you'll remember Daddy Warbucks. Well, Paul Warburg was the real Daddy Warbucks, after whom that character was.
Okay, I know that was long, but I wanted you to hear not just how it was done, but the people that were involved. Because when you hear the people that were involved, it really brings home a lot of the things I've been talking about here and a lot of the things that we've been covering. Now, fast forward, we've been under this Federal Reserve System for all this time, And you, from what you just heard, the people, as the official father of the Digital Asset Investor channel has said many times, he wanted me to look at how is JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs tied into this. And the reason he wanted me to look is because anywhere that is anything that's going to happen is not going to happen without JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs nowadays, or Rothschilds. I mean, Rockefeller, but all those names, it's interesting when you think about it, that all those names are still the ones running the show now. Jamie Dimon, all these guys. Now, so fast forward to 2008. Now, I'm not telling you that I believe that 2008 is when they started planning this. I think that they knew that the Federal Reserve System was finished a long time ago. I think 2008 was the catalyst to really put this in high speed. And so now that you know that they formed the Federal Reserve in Jekyll Island, that's in Georgia, off the coast of Georgia where I live, okay? Then you've got this. This is from May 6, 2011, and that was just a year or two after Bitcoin came out, right? And then after May 6, 2011, a year later, you would have XRP, right? They call this is from the Atlanta Fed, they call it return to Jekyll Island. Now, before I show you what this is, I want to show you who introduces Ben. You got
Chairman
Ben
Bernanke.
You have Ben Bernanke and you have Alan Greenspan on stage. But look who is introducing them. Well, that would be,
about what I'm going to ask you about the panic of.
I won't go into that. But one thing, what you will notice is the title of this is Return to Jekyll Island, Panic of 2008. In other words, we have to return and we have to do a revamp of this, right? It's a 4-part segment. Now, but the most interesting thing is in their discussion of returning to Jekyll Island and what was done wrong, what can we do to fix this going forward? In that discussion, 2 of the 3 guys on stage have been to Swell. Raghuram Rajan, he was at Swell in Singapore. I saw him on stage, former governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Here's a picture of him with Naveen Gupta. Who else? Ben Bernanke. He was at Swell in 2018, I believe. Dr. Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Federal Reserve, 2006 to 2014. And I also find it interesting that the inventor of the World Wide Web, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, was on there too. But here is Ben Bernanke at Swell. And by the way, this would be Gene Sperling, who was on Ripple's board, and also, I believe, was an advisor to the Obama administration, I believe. Okay, so let's go back. Now that you know all that, let's go back and see what Ben Bernanke says the problems were that obviously would need to be addressed by something. Okay, here we go.
Episodes were so dramatic was in a sense that we as a country were completely unprepared to deal with that kind of phenomenon. Given our congressional presidential system, unlike not a parliamentary system where the government can act relatively quickly, we didn't have mechanisms for quick response from the government. We didn't have tools to safely resolve firms that were not banks. The FDIC has a set of tools for resolving banks. We didn't have any analogous tools to resolve a large insurance company or a large investment bank. And so a lot of those episodes were ad hoc. We were using the tools that we could put together, cobble together. I think if anything good has come out of this, I hope it is that we will, in the future, both create a much stronger ex-ante supervisory regime over systemically critical firms, which is what the Dodd-Frank bill attempts to do, so that it's much less likely that they will come to this kind of brink situation, and that, should that happen, that we have a resolution regime and a well-established principles for resolving these firms in a way that does minimal damage to the broader system. So that part of the whole episode, the response to individual firms, which was the thing that cost us the most sleepless nights, was really an attempt to deal with what was really a very inadequate institutional structure and political structure for dealing with this particular kind of problem. Now, beyond those, though, I think beyond these dramatic events, I think that history and theory provided some very useful tools for addressing what happened in the crisis. And I'll just talk briefly about two broad sets. First of all, the Federal Reserve was set up to ensure financial stability. We know from Badgett, we know from Thornton how central banks are supposed to respond in a period of panic. In particular, we're supposed to lend freely against good collateral to provide liquidity. And that's precisely what we did. I mean, I thought of this whole thing as being that Badgett would have been happy with what we did. We set up all kinds of new mechanisms, recognizing that commercial banks were not the only run-prone institution in the current environment. We had to worry about money market mutual funds and the repo market and many others. And we were creative, and we worked with the Treasury and did what we could to set up provision of liquidity to those troubled firms and markets. And I think ultimately that proved successful. We ended essentially all our major interventions, our major liquidity programs at the beginning of this year. So that part, I really think of it as the classic central bank lender of last resort response. Again, adapted for the complexity of the financial system. I would add, in addition.
While we're on that lender of last resort, I will remind you that Miguel Valles slipped up and said in a video that I've shown you several times on here that he sees Ripple as being a sort of lender of last resort. And I've shown you before, I did a lender of last resort video. You will not find a video of anyone that's not with a government organization around the world talking about being a lender of last resort. The only people that are lenders of last resort are people that are running governments, okay, or world organizations like the IMF. That term's not used by people that are the head of XRP markets at a company. It's just not, okay. But the important thing of what he was talking about here is that the core of the problem is liquidity. That's what we've been talking about. That's the problem XRP solves. I believe that XRP is a core element of to be a bridge liquidity tool for the changing of the entire financial system in the world. Now, it's never going to hurt you to see these a couple more times. There are no coincidences, folks, and words mean things. Remember that. And when the history of my channel is written, just say words mean things, and he showed you a lot of them. Okay, now a lot of you will remember this. I wanted to go through with you what has Ripple and Brad Garlinghouse and all of those people associated told you, Tom, because I'm trying to get to what it is you really hold. It shocks me that some of these people that have been talking about this for years now still don't know what they hold. They're staring at coin market cap and talking about pumps and when's the price going to go up. Silly, childish stuff. That is not what this is about. This is one of those things that when it happens, it's going to happen. And when that happens, everybody's going to be like deer in the headlights. It's going to be like that, what just happened. But they've told us time and time again. This was when David Schwartz took this picture of him behind this castle, and he said, caption this photo, and Brad Garlinghouse said, here David shows us the mythical dreamland of rainbows and unicorns where people who doubt the utility of digital assets spend their days. All they've said to us over and over and over is that with utility, we will get price, okay? But I don't know that a lot of that people really conceptualize that and understand exactly what that means, and that's what I'm about to go over with you. Here's Miguel Valles saying,
because the more liquidity, the more utility, in theory, over time, the more valuable XRP will be.
Okay, this is why you and I are here. We are here because we believe that like they've told us over and over and over, that over time, more utility, the use of XRP, the money flows, That will cause all sorts of institutions to need to own XRP and thus drive the price up over time, okay? Maybe faster than you might think, okay? They've told us this time and time again. Here's Brad Garlinghouse telling you.
The long-term value of any cryptocurrency is going to be derived from the utility it delivers. The long-term value of any cryptocurrency is going to be derived from the utility it delivers. The long-term...
Okay? So the question for any of you out there, the question is that not why you're here? That's exactly why you're here. The whole concept of everything we're talking about and have talked about and what Ripple's talked about is that here's a digital asset with a limited amount. There's 100 billion. There's not going to be more. And over time, there's more and more use of it. And what does that do? It gradually rises the price, okay? Now, yeah, the price right now, the distraction price that everybody's all concerned about, that means nothing. But when it goes in motion, when that flywheel goes in motion, it's not a coincidence they use the term flywheel. Look it up. When that flywheel goes in motion, and I don't know exactly the day that goes in motion, but when it does, I'm about to go over with you what that looks like and why this is not just the greatest digital asset ever created, but it could very well end up being the greatest investment in the history of the world, period. That's what I believe. That's what I believe you hold. That's what I believe I hold. Okay, that's why I'm here. Okay, this is I'm not just making videos for my health. I'm making these videos because I believe that that's what you hold. Okay, now remember Bob Way, another guy that he was one of the first 10 employees at Ripple, came into the XRP community. Back last tweet from him was August 27th, 2019. He disappeared. He even said he was going to start a book club and all sorts of things, but no, he's gone, never to be heard from again. You have to wonder. I need to do a video on him because when you see people like this just show up and then out of nowhere disappear, these things mean things. It means things when people that were anonymous that show up and they say things that, with all of my experience in this, start to really make a lot of sense. Some of them. It means things that they disappear and then they start disappear, the accounts disappear and they get suspended. Well, Bob Way, look at what Bob Way said. Several people, and I've shown you this before, but it's not, we're not crazy thinking, hey, when this starts being used, some crazy things could begin to happen. He says several people left fancy jobs. Remember, these are Ivy Leaguers. This is Miguel Baez, Ivy Leaguer, Yale, Brad Garlinghouse, MBA, Harvard, you name it. Brianna Madigan leaves Goldman Sachs. I could name them all day long. The advisors for Ripple are just chock full of people with connections to Treasury, White House. Several people left fancy jobs and joined Ripple because, I paraphrase, if we capture even a minor fraction of the international payments market, do you know the value of XRP will need to have the support that? Do the math. Really, really big trade number. 100 billion XRP equals wow. Those sort of conversations always buoyed my spirits, and made me smile. But really, they also gave me anxiety and made me remember that my job was to make sure we don't all F this up. Okay? So we've been told over and over and over. Okay? Now, remember a core concept of investing, folks. I mean, this was heard. I heard this as a child. Buy land. They're not making any more of it. Okay? Now, I put this little spreadsheet together just to kind of show you this is what my thought pattern is on XRP as an investment, because I know what I hold. And if you're watching this, I think you might understand what you hold at the end of it. And these two things I wrote down because this is what I think of. Because this is, look, and I've told you before, there's only one disagreement within the XRP community, because we're all here because we believe that, like Brad Garlinghouse says, you've got this digital asset where there's a limited amount, 100 billion, and one of two things happens. either well, one of three things happens. Either, and these are the people that have probably lost faith. Either one, nothing happens with Ripple and XRP and it goes to zero. Two, XRP is used as a worldwide in a bridge currency, and because of that, the price of XRP slowly rises as the utility rises. And three, if you're in my camp, and this is just common sense to me, if you're in my camp, three, Ripple and XRP begin being used in our bridge currency to the world, and the XRP price slowly begins to rise. And then the world starts to realize that this is the only investment maybe in the history of the world that has a slowly rising floor. And then speculators pile in because everybody wants a piece of that. And at some point, they can't get a piece of it because they're priced out because it goes so high that they're just out. There's no opportunity for them anymore. They missed the boat. That's what I believe happens. That's what I believe you own. I believe you own this digital asset that there will only be 100 billion of, and that this floor is going to slowly begin to rise. And at some point, remember, there's less than 1% of us that own this. And at some point, the rest of the world it's going to be a frenzy. The rest of the world's going to see, wait a minute, why didn't I know about this? And you and I are going to be sitting back with our arms folded going, well, been telling you about it for 2 or 3 years now, and we're not going to feel bad because we're going to all know all of the things we went through to stay here because we understood what we owned. So yes, these two things. What happens when the investors realize this is an investment with a rising floor? Imagine 100 billion XRP, and this is how I like to think of it. Because this is literally this is a world reset, and it's also a reset of the current system. So imagine, and this is the way I imagine. I just played you that video of all those guys, all those powerful people going in boxcars down to Jekyll Island to plan what would be the Federal Reserve. The way I think of this is that this time it's different. This time, and I think I think that Ripple had to put some of the XRP out, and we as proud guinea pigs, I was glad to do it for them. We were able to get a piece of the action to be their guinea pigs in a sandbox and test this system out for them so that they could go around the world and show all the central banks and the banks and all the powerful people around the world that, hey, get your engineers, go try to hack it. Remember, they met with the Central Bank of China. They met with Luxembourg, you name it. They've been in rooms in Switzerland with 20 central bankers or more. I believe that's what happened. I believe this is going around the world and yeah, test it out. You try to hack it, whatever. Meanwhile, you and I, the smart ones, that less than 1%, the ones that saw it, praise the Lord, we were able to accumulate and get our share. I believe they know that at $10 or $20, most of you are gone for good. And I believe that there will be some who don't leave and could be their own bank in this new system. I believe when this all happens, if you hold 100,000 or more XRP, you could actually be your own lender of last resort. You could be lend your XRP to the world and make an income off of it. That's where I think this is going. So look at my chart here, I just broke this down. Here's the things you can own right now. Here we are in a great liquidity crisis. Here's the things you can own right now. And here's some different things that are involved in investments. An investment can be scarce. They're all speculative in nature. All investments are, and so I put a yes there. Some of them have utility, some don't. Which ones are less than 1% of the population currently invested in? That's an interesting thing. And then which ones could be a safe haven status, tying back into what Ripple said? Well, stocks and bonds I see as a man-made creation. They can issue more stocks. Companies can go bankrupt. Bonds, same thing. Bonds can be issued. Bonds can be defaulted on. We've seen this throughout history. So they don't really have that that scarcity thing that and maybe that's the wrong term for it, but they've got that negative downside. All of the investments, like I said, are speculative. Stocks and bonds, they don't have any utility. You can't, there's not, other than speculation, people buying them for speculation, there's not really a utility. They're less than 1% of the population. No, stocks and bonds have been around since the 1600s at least. And so everybody has had a shot everybody can own those. Safe haven stocks, no. Bonds traditionally have been a safe haven, but remember, this is the greatest debt that the United States and the world has ever been in the history of the world. And so bonds as a safe haven, forget it going forward. Gold and silver, scarcity. Yes, gold and silver have that. Yes, they have speculation. Utility, not really. I mean, you can have gold as a necklace if that's a use. I mean, gold and silver, the coins, necklace, yeah, but not in the way that XRP is going to have utility. Less than 1%, no. Gold and silver have been around since the beginning of time. They call gold God's money for a reason. Safe haven, yes. Gold and silver will be a safe haven, and I consider it to be something to own in all of this. Real estate, scarcity, yes. They're not making any more of it. Speculation, yes. People buy it for speculation. Utility, yes. You can buy a piece of real estate. And when I talk about real estate, I'm not talking about borrowing money, because borrowing money is not a good thing, folks, period. We've been sold that lie, but it's not. Going forward, my plan, if I'm able to do it, is to own real estate with no debt. Own it outright. But real estate does have utility. You can buy a piece of real estate, you can live in it, or you can rent it out. It does have utility. It can be used. Less than 1%? No. Real estate, since the beginning of time, has been an investment choice. Safe haven, in my opinion, if it's paid for real estate, yes. Because if it's paid for real estate and you can rent to renters in a worst case scenario, yeah, that's a good safe haven in my opinion. Bitcoin, scarcity, yes. There's only 21 million. Speculation, yes. It's all speculative. Utility, no. Bitcoin can't be used for anything, folks. So the only money that ever is going into Bitcoin is going to be for the speculation part of this. Okay. Now, less than 1% of the population. No, Bitcoin is exposed to more than 1% now. Bitcoin has the name recognition that none of the digital assets have. Safe haven, yes, I believe it will be. I believe Bitcoin's going to be allowed to survive. Okay, and it'll be digital gold, or what the store of value, whatever they want to call it. Now, XRP, scarcity, yes. Only 100 billion. Speculation, yes, like we've said. Utility. Folks, everything about XRP is better than all of the digital assets. It's faster, more scalable. All the things we've talked about on here. It's going to be used. It's going to be the bridge currency to the world. Less than 1% of the population, if you talk to them, go ask around. Don't take my word for it. Ask them if they know what Ripple is. Ask them if they know what XRP is. I believe this is by design. I don't think that it's. I think that when it's time for XRP to be known, it may never be known. But when it's time for things to be known, it's just going to happen. But then you have safe havens, and it goes back to these two questions here, folks. Imagine if I'm right, and this is a new system, like I'm telling you, which there's not a doubt in my mind. But what happens? Think safe haven. What happens when the world? Now let's say that this thing we're in right now gets worse, and that at some point in conjunction with this, the XRP as a use case finally kicks in. It doesn't matter. Let's say that every one of these asset classes, everybody starts dumping everything because they want liquidity, right? Okay, everybody starts dumping everything. Well, are they going to dump their asset that is like the one asset that is being used, okay, that is a bathtub that's filling up slowly with water? Are they going to dump that asset once the world realizes that this is an asset that's going to slowly increase in value, or maybe quickly? Slowly? No, they're not going to dump it. In fact, at some point, it may be an asset that no one dumps ever because they can't get it. Now, I mentioned can't get it because I wanted to draw your attention back to what I was talking about yesterday. The people that disappeared. Remember, this was that Kendra Hill on Steemit. Cryptocurrency will be made illegal. Look, first let's start here. The world only needs one. Before the digital age, using one world currency was not possible. Now that we're able to connect with people around the globe in seconds, one currency could be ideal. With that thought in mind, think about the cryptocurrency market. So many to choose from, yet only one is needed. This is not a maybe, this is a warning. Cryptocurrency will be made illegal. Nothing is left up to chance. Our world is always planned years in advance. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail, and failure is not an option. Allowing additional currencies to exist when the world is only using one would be disruptive, so it will not be tolerated, and it will be easier to stop than you think. The illusion is that Bitcoin, for example, is untouchable. The reality is that it is government controlled through the use of mining pools. Any cryptocurrency aiming to be decentralized, digital currency will not survive. The one that we will use has already been chosen. And then finally, I wanted to show you this. Digital gold for the upper class. Look at this paragraph down here. 5 years from now, it will be the upper class that is in possession of almost the entire supply of XRP. It is not meant for the lower class. However, at this moment in time, someone from the lower class can buy, hold XRP, allowing them to move up in the world. I call it the token of freedom. I believe, folks, that we have been, and you can use the term used if you like. I believe we've been used as a testing ground, but I also believe that we are the handful that are going to be allowed to use this, or they're going to be allowed to hold this digital asset. I believe that when this all goes live and when it all happens, I don't believe just anybody's going to be able to get their hands on XRP. And I know that sounds crazy, but hey, as I tell people, it's also crazy that they shut the governments of the world shut the entire world down over this current situation and completely shut the entire economy down. It's also crazy that Bitcoin was created out of thin air and went to $20,000. So yeah, we live in a crazy world. Now, let me remind you, in the description of all my videos, you can save up to 27% right now on the Ledger Family Pack. They're selling these get your family into crypto with 3 of our hardware wallets. It's up to 27% off. You might want to grab that while you can. This is the way that I store digital assets safely offline. And it's if Coinbase or one of these things goes down, you don't have to worry about it. Also, I wanted to remind you, this was from yesterday. Boeing, or the day before, Boeing announced it would cut 10% of its jobs, about 16,000 positions, through a combination of buyouts and natural attrition. Now, folks, I'm going to keep telling you, if you are being laid off, there's over 30 million people that are unemployed now. If you are being laid off, one of the silver linings in this is what I do. Is you can roll your 401k in part or in whole to an iTrustCapital IRA. I've got a coupon code in the description of every video I do where you can get a first month free. Go in the description. These guys, you're able to invest in Bitcoin and XRP in a either non-taxable or a tax-deferred. It's a non-taxable or tax-deferred way to invest in digital assets. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread, in my opinion. Okay, I wanted to finish this up with a couple of quotes. This is one of the great lessons I teach my sons. You have to believe it. The starting point of all success. Muhammad Ali. If I could put Muhammad Ali's belief system and attitude in a bottle and sell it, I would, because this guy had it. The it factor. This is what I've tried to instill in my sons, and I do it every day. He says in this quote, I am the greatest. I said that even before I knew I was. And then there's this from Billionaire Mindset. If you give up on your dreams, what's left? And that is exactly right. I'm the digital asset investor, not an investment advisor. This is for entertainment purposes only. Please subscribe and hit the like button and tell your friends and family that XRP is the one, and it very well could be the greatest asset ever created in the history of the world. You can call it crazy if you want, but that's what I believe. I know what I own. Thank you for listening.